Globally, cannabis is a 7.2 trillion rand industry with only 10% of that legalized. In Africa, South Africa was the first country to legalize the use of marijuana. This means that people can grow it and consume it in their personal capacity, and companies can grow it and manufacture it, but only for medical purposes. And so the capacity for businesses to fully take advantage of the cannabis industry in South Africa is still limited. But this isn't stopping Cilo Cybin. Cilo Cybin was the first company in South Africa to receive licenses for the medical cultivation and manufacture of cannabis products. So this is Africa Pulse. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn, and on this episode, we take a look at the budding industry of cannabis. I'm here at Cilo Cybin's manufacturing and cultivation site in Midrand, South Africa. And to discuss more about the business, I'm joined by the CEO, Gabriel Theron. Gabriel, thanks so much for your time today. Before we get into anything, situate us. This site where we are at today is really important and really special, right?
Yes, it is. It's the first fully vertically integrated cannabis company in South Africa. It's situated in Midrand. It's allowed to cultivate cannabis, medical cannabis, and also then process that. So that means extraction of cannabis and then formulating various things like oils, vapes, edibles, and so forth.
And that all happening under one roof, right here in South Africa. But there are some challenges here on our home ground because you can't truly profit from cannabis here. Like you mentioned, this is for medical purposes that you do all of this here. So what you really are focusing on is exporting. Where do these products that come from here go?
So maybe just also to understand the cannabis environment. So all of the licenses issued to date has been for export purposes only. So none of the cannabis manufacturers are really allowed to sell locally at scale. There are mechanisms in order which you can through the regulator approvals, processes and so forth, but it's not really to commercialize a business. With that said, yes, it's all for export markets. We only export. We have a small cannabis line, CBD range for local markets, which is within the regulations. But everything is exported. Currently, major markets for us, Australia, and now we're starting to look at Europe as well.
What other territories specifically? You say Europe. That's quite a big expanse there. What territories specifically then in Europe?
Europe would be your UK, and then also Germany, Italy, and those countries.
If you're exporting to all those countries, why does it make sense for you to still be here in South Africa?
Cost. So not a lot of countries can actually compete with South Africa from a cost point of view. Yes, you have, cost and regulatory. So yes, you have the Colombias that can compete on a cost, and Thailand on cost factors, but when it comes to the regulatory environment, they're not as trusted as our regulator in South Africa. So with that said, we have a double whammy. We've got cost on the one side that we compete with in the global market, but we can also, our products are highly sought after because of the regulator and the regulatory environment. And that's our two major biggest advantages.
It would be nice, I'm sure, if the market here in South Africa was completely open. Is that a possibility, and how far away are we from potentially opening up the market completely?
How long is a piece of string? So, no, look, from that perspective, we definitely moved from back in 2018 when the Concord did that announcement. However, if you look at just before elections this year, the president announced that cannabis is now decriminalized. So that's the first step. Second step after that is descheduling of the active, so the THC, which is a psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. What it means to deschedule is the regulators got a way to classify drugs. So as you know, if you go into, sometimes you have to go to doctor to get a script to buy certain medicines. Now that is because of the scheduling thereof. So cannabis is still very high schedule, that's 6. There was, in January, there was a circular that went out to public for public comment to ask where should we schedule. This is how we're planning as Department of Health to deschedule cannabis. So that went out. So what we're looking at next step is for that to come through. So if that comes through, the way we understood that wording doesn't mean it's going to be that wording, but if it is that wording, it should open up the recreational market. But still, even if that happens, you're still not allowed to trade in it. So the third step is then for Department of Trade and Industry to give a framework similar to tobacco and alcohol to say, are you allowed to trade? What's your trading hours? Are you allowed to be close to school? Who's allowed to buy it? All of those type of things to regulate that environment. Only then can I see that it will be open.
How has it been being in conversation with the government? Sometimes these things can be very tricky, very challenging, very difficult, and other times there's a real sense of trying to make it work.
We're not actively engaging like a lot of the other players. We do have casual conversation just to gauge where the industry is, but it's not really affecting us. We focused in our lane, export, that is where we want to focus. There's not a lot of people that can export, or other companies in terms of competition. If the markets were to open on this side, competition is already there. There's over 100 cultivation licenses today in South Africa. There's 3 or 4 manufacturing licenses today. So the waters are already red here, if you can call it that, should it open today. Our focus is export. We've been building very good relationships overseas for export, and because of a high quality product that we can offer. And for now, that's where we focus.
Given all of that, is there still a case to be made for tackling the perceptions of cannabis out there? Or do you think we've really won the battle on that? Do people understand it and the perceptions of it really change so that these things can be taken seriously, I guess?
I think it's going to take more time. If you understand where it all comes from, the perceptions, it was media created back in the day.
Oh dear.
And unfortunately. But I think it's going to take some generations to really get over it, to understand that plant-based medicines and this is medicine and it can actually help people. There's always when you speak cannabis, and maybe this is an interesting point, when you look at cannabis, if you, let's say for example, go today and you want access to cannabis and you go buy it illegally, immediately it's considered recreational, you want to get high. But you might be buying it to help with your anxiety, your pain, your whatever medical condition you're actually trying to target, but it's immediately, because you're buying it illegally or whatever the case, it's flagged as recreational. And that is what we've seen globally. Like a lot of the prescription medicines, it always run through doctors. You're only allowed to export medical cannabis. So there's always a doctor that prescribes. But if you look at the patient growth in Australia, 10,000 patients a month, you can't tell me that's just people that want to get high. Yeah. It is for conditions, it is for pain, chronic pains, it is for various other conditions that people use it. And now that it is also becoming a little bit more mainstream, the perception is changing, because now you can rather take cannabis, for example, for chronic pain than an opioid with 10 other things that it negatively affects. So the perception is changing, it's slow, but if you look at the uptake globally, it is definitely there. So yeah, it is a matter of time, but the aim for people using cannabis is not to get high necessarily. Same with alcohol. Everybody using alcohol doesn't use alcohol to just get drunk. So yes, you always have those people that does those things, but I think the perceptions are definitely changing very, very quickly.
So we're getting some perception change coming through. One idea I think a lot of people can get behind is if this industry were to be opened up and perhaps moving from a more free environment where it's recreational and medicinal, going forward, we can see some economic benefits coming through on that. Do you have any matchbox figures in terms of what that benefit would actually look like?
There was a report done in 2020 where they estimated the global market share, or in terms of market size of cannabis, legal and illegal combined, that was around the $400 billion market cap. If you look at South Africa, part of that was around the $1.7 to $2 billion a year in terms of size. So definitely, it's a massive, massive industry, both medical and then recreational combined.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about cannabis, but any business that grows has to diversify. Does it naturally lend itself towards a move into psychedelics?
Definitely so. So if you look at our name, it's a play on psychedelics. It was always our plan to be more than just cannabis. Cannabis was the stepping stone. Because of all the hype at the time around cannabis, and still, it's a very nice springboard into other plant-based medicines, and not even just plant-based. So the psychedelics are not all plant-based. So yes, the next step for us definitely to get involved in the psychedelic space, provided our regulator allows us to. But it is definitely on the cards.
How far out are you from initiating that?
A few months.
Fantastic. And also for export?
Yes. So again, we hope that it can follow the same model as psychedelics. As cannabis. Psychedelics is still a Schedule 7, so it's only for research purposes, not for commercial manufacturing. Where cannabis is a Schedule 6, where it means you can commercially produce products. So that is going to be the only problem that we face in terms of that, probably amongst many, but that will probably be the single biggest one. But we already have markets available and offtake ready for us, provided we can deliver.
Well, investors definitely buying into the growth picture that you've outlined, and perceptions, I think, even amongst investors changing, because you've come to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as a SPAC. That comes with all sorts of timelines and things that you have to do. Walk us through that and how close you are to delivering on this idea of listing as a SPAC.
So the SPAC is listed. It listed on 25th of July this year. And according to JSE rules around the SPAC, you have 3 years to then acquire a viable asset. So identify an asset that you want to buy and then go and buy it and bring it into the stable. We are a few months out. We always had the plan, and it's no news to anyone, that we are looking at buying this operational entity. So we created Cilo Cybin Holdings as the fund. And the fund is now going to come by Cilo Cybin Pharmaceutical, which is the operational cannabis entity. That will be the first viable asset. We've already put out a notice that we're in negotiation, basically with ourselves. But
those
now
should be interesting to sit at the table with those.
Definitely so. So now it is just going through all the hoops. Because it's a related party, there's a lot of extra tick boxes we have to tick. In terms of fair and reasonable, all of those type of things, that the transaction is fair and reasonable to all of our investors. So we're in that process, and if all goes well, it will be concluded within this year still, before December. That's I always overshoot, always have very tight timelines, and then it takes longer, but if all goes well, it will be this year.
And then you list on the main board of the JSE. Does it prompt you to consider listings in some of the territories that you export to, like Australia?
Not
yet.
No. So it's not part of our strategy. Our strategy is basically to, in year one, to de-SPAC, so meaning we buy our first viable asset and we de-SPAC and we become fully tradable. That might or might not be on the AltX, meaning if we qualify, which we very likely will, we'll move to main board. So then within the first year, we will de-SPAC and we will move to main board. There is a plan. The plan is 2 years, but I can tell you now it's probably not going to be 2 years, probably 3 years.
I see how you are with timelines, yes.
So the timeline is probably being realistic. I think we're looking at probably between 3 and 5 years to then have a NASDAQ listing, because we are aiming to go into registered drugs, meaning take a cannabis product, go through full clinical trials, prove that it actually does what we believe it's going to do, get to a phase 2 clinical trial at least, and then go to a NASDAQ is what we're earmarking at this point.
Well, we look forward to seeing all those developments. But for today, Gabriel, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Gabriel Theron is the CEO of Cilo Cybin, and that's where we leave it for this episode of Africa Pulse. But we're back same time, same place next week, so we'll see you then.